Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Em, and today we are going to be talking about my May wrap-up. I was back to my normal 20 books this month, which is nice to be back. I didn't think I was gonna make that number for a while. I read, like I said, 20 books this month. 4 of them were on audio, majority were some sort of tandem, whether it was the ebook with the audiobook or a physical book with an audiobook, but 4 were just strictly audiobooks. 10 of the books I owned were from my own library, 8 were from the actual library, and then I had 2 that I'd either borrowed from a friend or were advanced reading copies or something like that. Only one of the books I read was queer, which I don't love that. That's not good. And then 7 of the books I read were by BIPOC authors. All right, let's get into the DNFs. I only DNF'd 1 book this month, which is very impressive. I did DNF Rebel Skies. If you've seen my episode 2 of Wheel of Doom, I DNF'd it in that series, and this is a debut YA fantasy that just came out this year, and while I really loved the world building, I thought it was really interesting how there are these paper constructs and then the magic system is built around being able to control these paper constructs. I thought that was all really interesting, how people live in these like sky ships. I thought that was really cool. I just didn't care for any of the characters, and the writing wasn't very engaging for me. So that was my DNF. Let's go into my obligation reads. I had to play catch up a little bit this month because I'd gotten behind on the Betty Page's Challenge Your Shelf reading challenge that they have on Storygraph. So I read Boy Crazy Stacy by Ann M. Martin. This is, part of the graphic novel adaptation for the Babysitters Club. And this was a really cute, fun read. It was super nostalgic for me because I grew up reading the original Babysitters Club, and I just had such a lovely time just being reacquainted with these characters and this world. I didn't end up reading this book because it just, part of the reason I enjoyed it so much is because of the nostalgia. I'm really not the target audience for Babysitter's Club anymore, but it was a good time. The other book I read for the Betty Page's challenge is Mystery of Locked Rooms by Lindsay Curry. This is a middle grade mystery standalone, and I have just decided that Lindsay Curry is not the author for me. I tend to not like her books very much, and they just totally miss the mark, which is fine. It's middle grade. It's okay if I don't vibe with it. I think if a middle grade reader, or you like to read middle grade mysteries and you want a mystery that is more about puzzles and escape rooms than about solving a murder mystery, I would still recommend this. I think it's hard to find mysteries that don't revolve around a murder, and so I think it's really great when there is an option for kids or for older readers to explore that. But she's just not the author for me. That's okay. And then the other obligation-ish, it's an obligation I put on myself, but the other thing I had to read this month was for Buzzword Readathon. The prompt for May was to read a book with every in the title. And I listened to And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Frederick Bachman. This is a little novella. Is it even a novella? It's 70 pages, whatever that is, that short story or novella. And this is about a grandfather and a grandson, and the grandfather has dementia and is slowly forgetting things. And this was really heartfelt. It did tip into saccharine a little bit for me. I did tear up in the end, but honestly, I challenge anybody to read this book and not tear up at some point, especially if you have or had a close relationship with your grandparents. I don't know how anybody reads this and doesn't tear up a little bit. I ended up just giving it a 3.75. I wasn't super impressed, but I also am not a huge Frederick Bachman fan. I more read this because I needed a prompt and it was short, Okay, and then real quick, we're going to talk about the books that I do not have physical copies of because otherwise I'll forget about them. I also read Hooky by Miriam Bonister Tour. I might have butchered some of that, and if I did, I apologize. But this is a start of a middle grade fantasy graphic novel series about twins who miss the bus to their magical boarding school and are afraid of the reaction from their parents, and so instead they kind of run away and start apprenticing with this other witch. And in this world, witches are very much considered evil and wicked, and there is a princess and there's lots of stuff going on. For me personally, I felt like this graphic novel was just too long. And when we were actually following the plot, I was really interested and I thought it was really well done. I do really love the art style for this book. But there's also just a bunch of filler scenes that are just like the characters bantering with each other or getting into hijinks. And I lost interest during a lot of those scenes just because they didn't have a lot to do with the actual plot. I have been informed by my twins, who absolutely love this series, that the later books have a lot more going on plot-wise. There's a lot more adventure, there's a lot more suspense, and the characters age up as you go, where the twins are only 12 in the first installment. So I will probably be continuing on with the series, but I think I only gave it maybe a 3 just because of those like filler scenes. And then I also read Dreadful by Caitlin Rozakis. This is a new release that just came out at the end of May. This is a farcical fantasy about Dreadlord Gavrax, who wakes up at the beginning of the book and has 0 memories of anything before that very moment. He doesn't remember anything he's done. He's obviously in the middle of a plot to take over the kingdom, and he just has no memory of it. And he's basically having to stumble and flub his way the situations that he has found himself in. And I thought this was really funny. It's really lighthearted. It is a little bit gory and just has really great characters and found family, and how do you make amends when you realize that the way you've treated other people is wrong, and like how to build a life that you love and that you're proud of. And I really liked it. I thought this was a really great debut, and I might be buying a copy for my shelves, but thank you to NetGalley and to Titan Books for giving me a copy of this arc because it was such a fun surprise. Okay, I think we can move on to the physical books now. Let's start with my least favorite because we know I don't like to save those. I like to end on an up note in these videos. The Vacuum of Space by Julia Hooney. This was a book I pulled from my TBR jar. It is a sci-fi that we have had on our shelves for a really long time because I bought it for my husband, and my husband wasn't super impressed with it, but I wanted to try it for myself. And boy, oh boy, was this book not great. I gave this 1.5 stars. And this is a murder mystery set on a space station. And honestly, if it had just been a murder mystery set on Earth, like a regular murder mystery, it would have been good. But the author set it in space, but then was so lazy. And everything that had come from Earth. She took all of our regular human things and just put them on a space station. Like, there are the descendants of Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Putin on the space station, and they're part of like the elite, you know, whatever. And just all the conventions are still the same, and all the pop culture references are the same, and it just was so lazy, and I just didn't see the point of putting it on the space station if you weren't going to use some imagination to go with it. I know I said if it was just set on Earth it'd be good murder mystery. I take that back. The murderer was dumb. It was dumb. I did not like this, and I will be very happily unhauling this. I finally made more progress in the Witch Hat Atelier manga series, which is good because I kind of stalled out, not because I wasn't enjoying it, just because all the bright shiny things. So I read volume 5 and volume 6. I am still really loving this series. I hadn't loved, was it 4 as much? But in 5 and 6 we got more in depth with the 4 apprentices, and their relationships really started to blossom and grow, and I really love watching those relationships strengthen in this series. That's really the highlight for me, is all the relationships. We got a little bit more of like the political machinations going on behind the scene and the different groups of witches and like what their goals are and what their priorities are. And I did check out volume 7 from the library, and I'm excited to see where we keep going with this series. I'm getting close to the end because I think there's only 10 volumes out. Next up, we're going to talk about the werewolf books. So I did do a vlog where I read 3 werewolf romances, which was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. I read Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This was my first Ali Hazelwood. I had a really fun time. I gave this 3.75. I didn't really care for the mystery aspect of this book. Like, one of the plot points is that Misery, our main character, who is a vampire, her human best friend has gone missing prior to the start of the book, and Misery is then kind of strong-armed into this arranged marriage with the alpha male of the werewolf, one of the werewolf packs, named Lo, and Misery partly agrees to the marriage because she thinks Lo has something to do with her friend's disappearance, and so she's trying to find out what happened to her friend amidst like the romance plot. And I probably could have done without that mystery. That really didn't lend a lot to the book for me, but I found Lo and Misery's romance to be really fun, and like I enjoyed this way more than I thought I would. And I will definitely, like, if she writes more in this series, like if this has a companion novel with another couple, I will definitely be picking it up because I thought this was fun and I really liked this on audio. I thought that was a good time. And then I read The Fake Mate by Lana Ferguson, which I enjoyed significantly less. This started off so strong because it's contemporary romance, but it's fake dating. Mac and what's his name, Noah, are both doctors. Mac works in the ER. Noah is a cardiologist, and Noah's getting flack because he did not inform the hospital board that he was an alpha. And so they have concerns about his ability to perform his job. And then Mac's grandmother is hassling her about settling down. And so they decide to fake date to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And I thought this was really funny at the beginning. And I really liked Mac. I really liked the tone. But then there's a thing that happened, I don't know, halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, that kind of altered the like rhythm of the book, and I didn't love that. I also really disliked the 3rd act conflict. I thought it was just not handled well, and then when they were going to resolve it, like it resolved so easily for how doom and gloom Noah acted like it was. So I didn't love that. I don't think I will read anything else by Lana Ferguson, unless maybe if she does another paranormal romance, I might read that, but I don't have any desire to go back and read her contemporary romance. And then my favorite from this video, surprise, surprise, I gave this 4.25 stars, I had a good time, is Stolen by the Wolves by Lix Robinson. This is book 1 in the Viking Omegaverse, and this is one of those series where I'm pretty sure you got to read the whole series to get the HEA, so it ended on a cliffhanger. But this is like a Viking fantasy romance where both of the love interests are werewolves, and I had such a great time. This does read more like a fantasy romance. It's a little bit darker. It's a lot more violent, a lot more bloody, you know. Our main character is a werewolf, so, and a Viking. So, you know, take that as it will. There is content warnings in the front, so if you're interested in checking this out, check your content warnings. But I loved this. I love the characters. I love the world. I loved what's being set up. I love that I think it's gonna be, I think it's gonna be poly down the road, which I also really love. I don't know. This was also the least steamy of the bunch because like they're not together by the end of the book. So that might have something to do with it, but I'm definitely going to be continuing on with this series. I was like totally obsessed with this. Like I didn't update very much with the other 2 in that video, and I feel like I updated a ton with this one because I was so into it. Okay, there's no more theme. We're just going to go through until I get to my favorites of the month. I reread One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig, and this is another fantasy romance. And this magic system is based on tarot, and we have Elspeth, who has another being living in her head and is sucked into a plot to overthrow the king, and it's part of a duology. I had read this before, but I have yet to pick up the sequel, and it'd been so long since I read this one that I didn't remember anything, and I'm so glad I reread it because 40% of the time it was like I was reading a brand new book because I remembered so little from my first time. I didn't love it as much the second time as I remember loving it the first time, though I gave it the same rating. So somehow, like in the passage of time, I amped up this book more in my head and convinced myself that I loved it a lot more than I actually did. But I thought it was a fine time, and I'm interested to see how this all wraps up. And then the other book for my TBR jar that I read this month is Swordstone Table. This is a collection of short stories that are all Arthurian retellings. This is a mixed bag for me. I like that we had more like people of color and more queer characters. Like it was definitely a more diverse collection of Arthur retellings, but for the most part, a lot of them didn't work for me. Since we have past, present, and future, and so all the past stories are taking place like during the time of King Arthur, and I didn't love most of them because they were so traditional in a lot of ways, even though they're adding in people of color and queer characters. Like it just felt like nobody was doing anything super creative with the mythology. I loved the present section. That was really cool. I loved what those authors did and how they put the King Arthur stories into modern times. And then the future stories didn't work for me either because they're just weird. I sadly don't think I'll be holding on to this just because I'm not a big short story reader to begin with, and I don't see myself rereading this. I'm sorry, I stopped giving y'all ratings. That's just not, we're just not good at that part of these wrap-ups. And then I did listen to We Set the Dark on Fire by Taylor K. Mejia. This is the first book in a fantasy duology. This is not my favorite type of YA fantasy. This is very much a super patriarchal society. Women are in really subservient positions. They don't have a lot of power, and it's one of those where eventually everything is going to get burned down and, you know, they're going to fix it, but I don't find that style of fantasy very enjoyable to read. It's definitely from a very specific time. I think this was like a 2019 book, which, you know, is kind of when we were really going through that with YA fantasy especially. And I just don't find those enjoyable because I feel like we never get to spend time with the characters when they're not in crisis because the stakes are so high and the world is so bleak. But I do really love this author. I really like her middle grade, and I really like her style of writing. I don't know if I'll finish the duology just because it's not my style or my preferred subgenre. But if that's a subgenre that you really like, I would recommend this because I think the writing is really good. I think the world building is really well thought out and well rounded, and I think the characters are really easy to root for. I also read The Dead Cattail Assassins by P. Djeli Clark. This is an arc. This doesn't come out until August of 2024. This is a novella. It's just over 200 pages. And this is not my favorite P. Djeli Clark, but it has all the components that I really love about a P. Djeli Clark book. I think the world building is really, really cool. The way the gods work, just the world building is really cool. I always wish his novellas were a little bit longer just because I think the world building is so expansive. I did like the first half of this book more than the second half of this book, but this is about Evine, who is a dead cattail assassin. So she is dead and has been resurrected and sworn fealty to this goddess and is basically an assassin for hire, and there's 3 rules of being a dead cattail assassin, and Evine at the beginning of the book is set on this contract and is forced to break one of the rules, and that sets the whole plot in motion. And yeah, I thought the banter was hilarious in this one, and I think this would be really fun to read on audio when an audiobook is available. Oh, I forgot to talk about this one at the beginning. So for the Betty Page's Challenge Your Shelf reading challenge. The 2 books I talked about at the beginning were me playing catch up, but for this month, this is my book that I was supposed to read in May. I finally read The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson, and I loved this so much. I mostly listened to it on audio. Audiobook is incredible. Like, I highly recommend reading it that way. But this is a Carrie retelling where our main character, Maddie, is at track one day and it starts to rain and she gets wet, and everyone realizes because once her hair gets wet, it starts to curl and almost like grows like to mythical proportions in the way it's described, but everyone realizes that Maddie has been passing as white her whole life and is actually black. And she lives in a really small southern town that still has segregated proms in 2014. And so, of course, that brings like this reckoning to the town. And it was so good. I haven't read Carrie, but my husband's a big Stephen King fan, so like he would tell me, like as I was talking to him about it, he would tell me like what parts of the book Tiffany Jackson pulled, what is more original. But this is mixed media telling, so you're flashing back and forth between a podcast that is being recorded after the fact about what happened at prom, like a true crime podcast, and then you have like eyewitness accounts from police reports mixed with in the moment perspectives of following different characters as we lead up to prom. And it was so good. I absolutely loved it. Highly recommend it. And not too gory and not scary. So I struggled to kind of define it if it's like a mystery or if it's a thriller or if it's a horror. It probably leans more into thriller category, which is not usually my favorite, but I had such a good time with this. I also made more progress in the Inheritance Games series. I read The Hawthorne Legacy, which is book 2. Well, I listened to it because I really just listened to these on audio. And this series is about Avery, who finds out that a Texas billionaire that she's never met has died and left her his entire fortune. And in book 1, you're trying to figure out the mystery of why he left her his fortune. And in this one, you're following more the mystery of how her mother and child of the billionaire are connected and how that connects back to Avery. And again, it was really fun. This is such a great popcorn series because they just read so fast. The chapters are super short and it's just a really fun time. And then I also listened to With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo, which has been on my mental, like, you need to read this book list since it came out. This is a prose novel about Imani, who is a teen mom. She's a senior in high school. She has a 2-year-old, and she really wants to be a chef. And so you're just following her in her senior year of high school. And even though this is told in prose, it reads like it's poetry because Elizabeth Acevedo's writing is just so lyrical and so beautiful. And I really, really liked this, and I'm so glad I finally read it. Okay, y'all, we're into my 2 favorites of the month. I'm so excited. So my favorite nonfiction of this month, was my only nonfiction? I guess so, was The Rise and the Fall of the Dinosaurs, A New History of a Lost World by Steve Brucetti. This was such a good deep dive into like what we know about dinosaurs now, like what we used to think what we thought we knew and what we know now through digs. Like, Steve Brucetti is an expert in his field, and it really comes through in this book, and I just had the best time reading this. It was so fun. The audiobook is really good. There's pictures in here of different fossils and dig sites, and like, if you are a dinosaur nerd, like, I highly recommend this book. I don't know that there's a better nonfiction book about dinosaurs to read. And then my favorite book of the month, is this my only 5-star? Yeah, this is my only 5-star of the month. And definitely outside of my like wheelhouse, is Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. And this book is a whole lot of different things. It's contemporary, it's literary fiction, it's historical fiction, it's sci-fi. It's just doing so much. This is one of those books where you have a bunch of different points of view, and they're almost told in vignette style, and you're just bouncing back and forth, and eventually you see how they are all connected and how they all relate to each other. I'm not going to tell you a whole lot because I went in knowing nothing, and just the journey of finding out how all these people were connected was so lovely. Like, it was one of the biggest joys of reading this book, but I thought this book was really beautiful. I loved Anthony Doerr's writing. I love his storytelling. I loved his characters. And I think even though he tells you what's going to happen at the end, and even though I knew what was going to happen, or some of what was going to happen at the end, I was still so emotional as I read those parts. And I just think this is a really beautiful book, and it's one of the few 600-page books that did not feel like 600 pages. It felt short, which I think is a feat and not something that I usually say about big books, but no complaints. I didn't feel like there's anything that needed to be edited out. It all felt necessary. It all felt important, and I'm so glad I finally read this because it was just absolutely magnificent. All right, friends, and with that, we have made it to the end of my wrap-up. Thank you so much for watching and spending your time with me. I would love, love, love to know what you read in May, what your favorites were, what your least favorites were. If you need a safe place to rant, feel free. If you want to leave an emoji to let me know you're here, let's do some sort of cloud or sky emoji. I think that'd be cute. And like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I will talk to you all in the next one. Bye!